present and their descendants. Item 2, the disclaimer. The terms and conditions of entry to this meeting are posted on the door as you enter, and please ensure you have read them prior to attending this meeting. Normally I read out a big preamble, but just for people making deputations, please make your comments respectful to the council, councillors and other members of the public. Attendance and apologies. I have Councillor Congdon over East. He's an apology. Councillor Prodovnik will be attending electronically. Councillor Howlett is running about 15 to 20 minutes late, and I think everyone else is here. Who's next to you? Councillor Richardson isn't here. And I advise, after discussion with the CEO and senior staff today, from now on there will be no more Zoom meetings at briefing or agenda forums. Will be in person. For council meetings, if it complies with the local government regulations, under those conditions, you will be allowed to Zoom electronically, but only for full council meetings from now on. Item 4, declarations of financial and proximity interests or interests affecting impartialities. I have 2 so far. Mr Coates declared an impartiality interest in item 4.1, proposed amendment to LPS 17 number 211, the rezoning of the John Septimus Rose School, as a close family member of his is employed by the landowner. And Ms Lay has declared an impartiality item in item 3.3, Midland Junction Arts Centre activation, lease and service payment to provide community arts and programs and services, as she attended high school with a current board member. Are there any other councillors or staff?
Yes, I have one.
Thank you, Councillor Catalano. Well, perhaps if you can complete the form, hand it up and I'll read it out when it's there. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I'd just like to declare I'm a member of the Swan Guildford Historical Society, so therefore I have to fill in impartiality.
Thank you. You can complete the form and have it handed up and I'll be read next week. Item 5, public question time. Questions relating to reports contained in the agenda in item 5.1. Questions of which due notice has been given. There were nil. Item 5.2, questions without notice. Are there any members in the public gallery who'd like to ask public questions only to items that relate to the agenda? Being no indication, we'll move on to item 6, reports and notices of motions. 6.1, additional information from officers. At this stage there are nil. Item 6.2, deputations. In accordance with the current procedures for public participation at agenda forums, all requests for in-person deputations and submissions of written deputations required by 3 p.m. yesterday, Tuesday the 30th of August 2022, and all written deputations received by 3 p.m. at the same date were circulated with the preliminary agenda on Tuesday evening. In Part A of the agenda, there are nil deputations, which takes us to Part B. It's item 3.1, We the People WA Inc. Family Outreach Centre Midland, request for funding support. It's on page 173 of your agenda, councillors. I was advised that Helen Dallard was going to make a deputation, but I believe that's now changed to Mr Danny Murphy. Thank you, Mr Murphy. You'll have 5 minutes to make your deputation once you start speaking. Could I just ask you to turn your microphone on if you just push the speak button till the red light comes on?
How's that going? Good?
Just so make sure people watching can hear you.
Thank you. As noted in my previous appearance on this item, I'm classified as a friend of We the People and have assisted in developing the proposal before you over a number of years and have committed to financially contribute to the ongoing operations of the proposed new outreach centre. The recommendation before you declines the request for a contribution by the city, including for reasons that the city does not ordinarily contribute to the capital cost of refurbishing privately owned buildings unless there is a clear strategic imperative to do so. We submit that there is a clear strategic imperative to do so, and I'll address the notion of imperative under 3 headings. Firstly, services imperative. The Council's strategic community plan incorporates the following objectives: build a strong sense of community health, well-being and safety, build social inclusion and connectivity in local places and areas, and build service delivery options to meet future needs of aged, youth, families and children. So despite what appears to be represented in the report before you, the proposal is entirely consistent with these objectives, and page 5, well, it was my page 5, it may be a different page in front of you, of the report before you, highlights the benefits to the City of Swan. And I'll just read one paragraph. The community will benefit by early intervention and prevention to break the cycle of disadvantaged and dependency as detailed in supporting documentation. The project is based on research previously conducted and is considered evidence-based. The restoration of the iconic heritage-listed building located close to Midland Town Centre will contribute to the cultural, social and economic activities and is not expected to impact on nearby residents, but will provide convenient access to other government and non-for-profit services. This paragraph, written by the officers, represents an enlightened summary of the benefits. A key objective of the services to be provided is to build resilience and capacity at an individual level, including providing basic life skill for those disadvantaged or marginalised. The programs and services will assist them to re-enter community life. The number of, in particular, women and children seeking such support is not going to diminish, and based on the research, it is critical that these services are available at a local community level. It has a strategic imperative with respect to the needs and services to be provided. The commercial imperative. It is understood that there is a way to go with our proposal, with the request dependent on securing Lottery West funding of up to $4 million to complete stage 1 of the refurbishment. If the Lottery West funding is not successful, the council contribution will not be required. However, Lottery West advises that the City of Swan contribution is critical to we the people being successful with an application. With respect to the issue of private ownership, it is highlighted that if capital funding can be secured, then the property can be occupied for 25 years at a peppercorn rent. It then becomes very much a community asset. It's not a case of council funding being used to generate a rental income stream for the property owner. So in commercial terms, approval of this request can trigger financial outcomes very much greater than the $250,000 per annum over 2 years.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
Sorry?
You have 1 minute left.
Yep. It will trigger a multi-million-dollar grant from Lottery West and a 25-year peppercorn rental arrangement from the owner, a great return on investment. Historic and civic imperative. The report refers to heritage grants. As we understand it, the most we'll get is $40,000, and if we secure heritage funding, the Lottery West option falls away. This is an opportunity to enhance the historic and civil heart of Midland via the upgrade and conversion of a dormant building into a place for people rather than cobwebs. As I said in my first appearance, this is a moment-in-time opportunity. Whilst acknowledging that there are a few hurdles to jump over, it is imperative that Council becomes an active participant now in order for this proposal to advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions rising out of that, councillors? Councillor Jones first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to commend We the People for putting this together. It's a great asset. One question is, would this venture be able to operate at another venue that isn't heritage listed? because heritage listing, it's going to cost lots of bucks to do it. Could it operate in another venue?
Well, to answer your question, it could operate in another venue, but it needs to be accessible, we believe, to be successful within the centre of Midland, and we need access to a property that's not going to cost us anything for the next 25 years in terms of property costs, normal property leasing costs. So it's a yes and no, if I can answer it that way. This property has become available to us under that circumstances, but we acknowledge the heritage costs, but also it's an opportunity to fix up that building for the long term.
Further question, Councillor, of staff? Okay, we'll deal with that later. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Danny. Danny, in the report, staff talk about the feedback from Lottery West. Is that the same view that the committee holds?
Yeah, we understand that with Lottery, well, generally I'll referring to that feedback about the importance of the business case, etc., etc. We understand all of that. We just have to start somewhere, and we're asking Council to put the first foot forward with us before going to Lottery West. We don't see any issues associated with the conditions that have been outlined in there from Lottery West.
So, Mr Mayor, if I could just perhaps rephrase my question then. Do you think a more positive, have you provided a more positive indication from Lottery West about able to secure that $4 million grant funding?
I don't know whether... I might ask Helen Dullard, who's been involved directly with Lottery West. Would you mind if she comes and answers that, Mr Chair? Yes.
I don't mind as long as the question's answered to the best of the person's ability.
Answer, thank you. There's a couple of ways of looking at this. One is the total cost is $4 million to do the whole project. We've already gone to the quantity surveyor to get recostings if the project is halved, which would reduce the amount that the project would that we require from Lottery West, which might help it. But to do the whole project, yes, we'd want the around $3 to $4 million, and but we're willing to go back on part of the project to acquire that funding. The funding is still from Lottery West, dependent on funding from the council.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just had a quick question. So would the people be willing to, would the people, the We the People WA Incorporated, be willing to provide a copy of the correspondence from Lotteries West that states the City Swan funding is imperative for that support from Lotteries West there?
That information, I understand, is being provided verbally at this stage.
Is it possible to have a copy of that provided to the City?
We can ask for it, certainly.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions. We'll move on to the next item. Councillor Jones, you had a question of staff, and Councillor Johnson, you had a question for the presenter or staff? Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was a bit slow there, Mr Mayor. Yeah, my question is, I think we're estimating the Capital Works project is for 10 years and it's $12 to $18 million. I guess the question is, if you had that much money and you were designing this from scratch on a greenfield site, would the building look, the new building, look anything like the building you're proposing to repurpose? So if it's purpose design, it wouldn't look anything like the old convent, would it?
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Jones, you had a question of staff?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was just wondering what dollar figure the city could put on what they spend on making good antisocial behaviour around Midland.
I think you want to take that on notice, Mr Bishop?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We wouldn't be able to give an exact dollar figure, even if I take it on notice, but obviously the city does invest significant resources around managing crime and antisocial behaviour in collaboration with other agencies, particularly the police. Of particular note is funding over recent years towards programs such as CCTV and also management of local laws across the Midland area. We can certainly provide a figure in regards to community safety. I'm not sure I could break it down though exactly for Midland.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson of staff. Well, I'll allow it this occasion, but normally we need to move on.
Thank you. I just want to quickly clarify, if it's $3 to $4 million that you're seeking from Lotteries West, if it falls on the shorter scale of $3 million, what would that extra million then deplete from the project? And how will that be made up? Or what will it take from your vision?
It's the internal design of the building, and the external services would need to be cut back to suit. But internally, what we're looking to do is to cater for a range of different service providers. The ability to provide specific services for all of the providers we want to do would diminish. But we could adequately meet our objectives with $3 million if it comes back to that. Yep.
Thank you for your time and your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item, item 4.1, proposed amendment number 211 to local planning scheme number 17 to rezone John Septimus Rowe Anglican School from private clubs and institution to residential development and on Beachborough Road North and lot 385 Black Boy Way, Beachborough. It's on page 192 of your agenda. We have an in-person deputation from Jason Bartell, the Anglican Schools Commission and Principal of JSR, in support of the officer's recommendation. Mr Bartell, you'll have 5 minutes once you start speaking, thank you, and I'll try and give you a minute's warning at 4 minutes in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and councillors of the City of Swan and officers of the City of Swan for your time tonight. I don't think I'll take the 5 minutes. However, I just wish to highlight that I bring no new information to the council outside of this report. In my reading of the officer's report, I find it considered and detailed. It thoroughly reflects the due diligence applied by the Anglican Schools Commission and the John Septimus Rowe Anglican Community School in its investigation of all options for its Beachborough campus before making the significant decision to close the school. It picks up the elements of our marketing and attraction and retention strategies. It picks up all of those elements of our engagement with the community of the Beachborough campus on our school. It also reflects the fact that 215 out of our 222 current students will transfer over to our major campus in Mirrabooka. So I bring no new information and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Being no questions, I thank you for your attendance and your deputation.
Thank you.
Moving to the next item, item 4.2, State Administration Tribunal request to reconsider proposed tavern on Action Road, Malaga. It's on page 223 of your agenda, councillors. And the first person presenting is Mr Noel Farrell against the officer's recommendation. Mr Farrell. Thank you, sir. You'll have 5 minutes and I'll try and tell you when you have 1 minute left remaining. Thank you.
The Mayor and councillors, I wish to bring the following items to your attention regarding the proposed tavern at 5 Action Road, Malaga. As the previous application was rejected by all councillors, the applicant has taken the decision to mediation and the new proposal has been lodged. If this is to be approved, I believe there should be some amendments. The main amendment would be no parking signs on both sides of Action Road from the driveway of 15 Action Road to the southern corner of 2 Pavers Circle and a concrete footpath and ballards extended to 15 Action Road driveway, which is only another 7 to 8 metres. Refer to my picture 1. The installation of ballards and a footpath, I believe, is designed to get the application approved without addressing the street parking and safety. The original application was refused due to unsafe road conditions and would be extremely dangerous for people in their cars if there was street parking along Action Road. No parking on both sides of the street should not be treated as a separate issue, as it forms the framework for the safety of all concerned. In my original deputation, I outlined the street hazards. People will take the easiest option available to them. By not allowing street parking, patrons will be diverted to a designated parking areas and they will be off the streets. The street parking through this area on both sides of the road is extremely dangerous. I know the no parking signage would be a cost to the City of Swan, but this would save a lot of problems in the future. Parking adjacent to our property would be a problem. Restricted truck access. We often have large vehicles and long-haul trucks entering and exiting our property. The aim is to reduce traffic hazards, not create additional ones. Container trucks, semi-trailers and oversized trucks that are not associated with our business often use the road because it's an industrial area. There are multiple businesses registered in 5 Action Road, Malaga. The latest addition is the Martia Group. The parking for these other entities is not mentioned, and I assume they will be required to vacate the premises prior to the scheduled opening times of the proposed tavern. Once again, I strongly believe there should be no street parking on both sides of Action Road, from the driveway of 15 Action Road to the southern crossover of 2 Paver Circle, and the concrete footpath and ballards extended to 15 Action Road driveway. These safety measures should be part of the consideration of the proposed tavern, and it all works prior to its completion. I would appreciate your consideration on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? No questions. I thank you. Yep, thank you for your attendance and deputation. I'll hear from the next deputation and then we'll go to staff questions. The next person presenting is Mr Brad Hill, and he's requesting a deferral, I believe, on behalf of the applicants. Mr Hill, you have 5 minutes if you need it.
Certainly, we won't take that long. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for all the support staff here as well. I wasn't planning to, but I suppose in response to Noel's deputation, please note that we did mention at the SAT hearings that having no parking signs there would be of benefit, so that's something we're in support of. With respect to extending it, that's an interesting question because obviously it has a cost associated to it. Really, why I'm here today is just looking to request a defer, and the reason being is that we've been going through a capital raising process and are now in a position to be able to secure a lease which gives us an extra 17 bays than what we've put forward. So we'd like to defer so that we can actually have an application that reflects the additional car parking that we're going to have on site.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman, you have a question of staff first. Okay. I'll have a question to Mr Russell or Mr Vanderlyn. Are there any implications for the requested deferral in relation to the SAT timing or obligations? If you can advise, thank you.
Through Mr Mayor, yes. Not insurmountable, but I think this may have happened. The applicant, as I advised the applicant's agent a couple of days ago, the first order of business for them would be to secure an extension to the SAT orders for the reconsideration of this item. The applicant may have done that, I'm not too sure, but that will need to be arranged because otherwise the SAT will be expecting a decision. So provided that extension of time is secured by new orders being made by the SAT at the applicant's request, then there's nothing that would prevent the council from agreeing to a deferral to allow the applicant to submit the new application. I think the timely thing is that the applicant's going to have to think hard as to how much extra time they're going to need from the SAT on this recon matter so that they can amend their application and submit it and we can deal with it.
Thank you, Mr Russell. So just make sure I've got it right. It's up to the proponents to request that deferment time to the State Administrative Tribunal, and once granted they can advise us and a new report would come before Council. Thank you. Councillor Parry.
How long will that normally take, Mr Russell? How long will the process take? That's just been discussed then. Week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, the process in terms of writing to the SAT and obtaining
the approval
for an extended time.
Yes. Guesstimate.
Taking me 5 minutes, Mr.
Yeah.
All right.
You've got to answer, Mr Hill?
Yes, we've actually already instructed Harley Dykstra to do that, write that letter. So I'm just not sure if they sent it today or if it will be sent tomorrow.
Then I'll note a deferment coming through, Mr Mayor. I'll put through a deferment if that's the case.
Thank you, providing we get that in written confirmation. No other questions, councillors? Then thank you for your attendance. I also note there's a written deputation from Mr Mike Ritchie, a neighbour. I'm not sure if it's for or against, but that should have been included in the preliminary agenda form sent out last night. Moving on to the next item, item 4.3, the Responsible Authority Report, two-storey mixed commercial development, the Promenade in Allenbrook. That's on page 232 of your agenda. And there's a written deputation against the officer recommendation from the Honourable Lorna Harper. If that can please be noted, thank you. Which takes us to the next item, item 4.5, amendment for approval of extractive industry various lots in Upper Swan. It's on page 595 of the agenda. We have Mrs Anne Winchester, Secretary of the Swan District Ratepayers and Residents Association, against the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Mrs Winchester. You'll have 5 minutes once you start, and I'll try and give you a notice when you have a minute left. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. My name is Anne Winchester, and I'm representing the Upper Swan District Ratepayers and Residents Association for the agenda item number 4.5. Our association and several of our members previously submitted objections to this proposal, expressing concerns about the inevitable further impacts on traffic, dust, noise, and our well-being and health. Pardon me. It is blatantly obvious that any additions or increases to the current extractive industry sites that will have an adverse impact on the amenity of the locality. We question the job lot of DA 640 2019. There's 10 sites, whereas there are only 2 sites mentioned in the application for the increase in volume of extraction. Does this mean further lots listed in this DA will then have the increased volume of extraction by stealth? Approval would set a precedent wherein other operators of the remaining sites in Upper Swan would expect the same considerations. A major concern is Lot 100, Great Northern Highway, included in the DA. This is well within 100 metres of the nearest residence of the Upper Swan town site, only separated from the town site by Great Northern Highway. The separation distance has been disregarded. Lot 100 is comparable with DA 743 2016 Lot 2 Apple Street, initially refused by Council on the 12th of April 2017 by 9 votes to 4. One of the reasons for refusal was the adverse impact on the amenity of the locality. The DA was later approved basically because the operation would only occur over a two-week period per annum and over a 5-year period. Currently, DA 640 2019 allows clay operations to be carried out from September to May. A 50% increase in tonnage from 80,000 to 120,000 will result in the increase in the duration of the extraction and therefore will increase the period of the impacts. Many of the Upper Swan residents have lived here since the early 1970s. State and local government approved the residential development on the subdivision shown on survey plans dated 1912. We believe regulators now have a responsibility for these past planning approvals by considering and valuing the health and well-being of existing residents and ratepayers. There are huge excavation activities to the north, south and east of the town site, generating dust pollution and sand drift from north, northeast, east and southeast directional winds. No amount of watering and building bunds can stop wind picking up dust particulates. The earth bunds themselves provide a handsome surface for the wind to collect even more dirt or dust. The air quality in this locality is already compromised by the accumulative effects of increased traffic flow from local and other north-east corridor developments. We could find no discussion on access arrangements for trucks entering and leaving the site, which will occur over a longer period. From past observations, dust from exiting trucks will billow across the highway into existing residents. Our association sees this as an opportunity to start the process of having separate DAs for each individual excavation site rather than having a group application. This would allow separate conditions for all lots, but especially lot 100, comparable to those set for lot 2 Apple Street.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
Restricting the period of operation, the term of the licence, and placing more stringent regulating and reporting of operations requirements during adverse wind conditions. Another concern is the lack of monitoring of the conditions placed on the extractive industries, especially the disregard for rehabilitation of previous sites. Page 607 and 608 of the agenda documentation shows maps of the sites included in this application. There are several sites, 4 of which have been labelled as previously excavated and 1 site labelled as previously rehabilitated. However, there is very little evidence of said rehabilitation. We would like to remind the Council of the definition of rehabilitation, which is the act of restoring something to its former condition. It appears the operators walk off the sites, leaving the earth bunds in place, piles of unused and valueless soil in heaps, and allowing the pit holes to fill with water. The notion that these bog holes can then be called lakes is a farce. Revegetation appears to occur more by Mother Nature rather than planned plantings. The extractive industry is inconsistent with the provisions of the Council-adopted rural planning strategy and has the potential to prejudice future developments within this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions arising, councillors? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Anne. In particular, there are a number of sites around the area with bunds for dust and the appropriate suppression. Have you noticed, because they haven't been vegetated or anything, have you noticed that there's, under high wind, that you get a lot of dust or the like come off those bunds?
Well, I can speak specifically for Lot 2 Apple Street because I live directly opposite in the easterly direction. So when those easterly winds blow, I can feel the sand and grit hitting me as if you're walking along the beach, you know, when the wind blows on the beach and you can feel the sand hitting your legs, and I can certainly do that.
So, if I may, is that under just normal windy conditions or when the mine is being operated or
just when the easterlies are blowing?
Just the easterlies, thank you. And in terms of rehabilitation, there are a number of sites around the area. Have you seen, have you got any evidence of the rehabilitation of the area and whether or not compliance that you are aware of has been complied with?
We have contacted most of the landowners of the excavation sites and asked them if they could invite us to view a rehabilitated site, and the silence has been deafening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you for your deputation and your attendance. Councillor Henderson, you've got questions for staff, thank you.
In particular, are there audits on rehabilitation programs that are required, particularly about the ones that are progressive? And if there are audit programs, who does it and who do they report to?
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In some instances, well, it's important to note that you might operate with dual approvals, local approvals from a planning perspective, and you may have in some instances environmental approvals. I can't speak for programs of auditing with respect to compliance with environmental approvals other than they are generally constructed to require the proponent to report back annually as to their compliance with conditions of environmental approvals. In relation to our approvals, no, we don't have an active program with respect to rehabilitation. Much of what we're dealing with in relation to extractive proposals in Upper Swan, as Council will probably be well aware, are legacy issues with respect to facilities that have been excavated for many, many years, decades in fact, As Ms Winchester has observed, part of what was accepted back in the day with respect to rehabilitation was the acceptance not necessarily of filling in a hole back to its level, but as we've pointed out here, in some instances an acceptance of creating man-made lakes as forms of effectively artificial wetlands, so to speak. So there is changes around what might be accepted as rehabilitation. There are legacy issues around that, and we don't have an audit program. What I can say in one aspect is that we have become more stringent in saying that you rehab when you complete a stage, rather than saying, here's a rehab plan and we'll do it when we exhaust this pit in 10, 20, 30 years' time or whatever. So we have moved towards doing a staged rehab rather than an end-of-life rehab.
Further question, Councillor Henderson?
Thank you, Mayor. The traffic flow, is this going to continue through the back way to Copley Road?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's the only thing that this report is doing in terms of modification is the volumes of extraction. So everything else, as set out under the original approval, remains the same, including existing access arrangements.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the bunds, Mayor, when we see greens or clear sites where there's sand, there's like a paper mache style surface gets sprayed on to retain the sand. Could that kind of product be used on these bunds to stop the dust issue?
Very succinctly, Mr Mayor, through you, there's absolutely no reason why we can't move towards insisting on requiring the best possible means of mitigating against dust, particularly if we're putting in bunds and having them planted. While the planting is taking, absolutely, there's no reason why moving forward we can't specify certain treatments such as what Councillor Henderson has articulated be required as conditions of approval.
Perhaps I'll discuss with staff during the week and move for a couple of little amendments. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Catalano?
Thanks. Just back on that rehabilitation issue, I remember when this last one came up, was the Apple Street one, or the last time that the clay pits came up, and it just seems like nothing's moved on from that in terms of putting conditions on the rehab of these developments, these clay pits. So how do we go about doing that? How do we go about now making sure that these pits are rehabilitated?
Through Mr Mayor, look, it's entirely at the discretion of Council to ensure that the types of conditions that go on any future approvals are to its satisfaction. Certainly I can think of a recent example, I'd have to go and get the details, where we had a very specific condition to say before they expand their extractive activities, they rehabilitate the existing pit before they do that. I can recall that a very specifically manufactured condition for that purpose. So we are doing that, and Council can look at the conditions that we've presented staff, and as it sees fit, if it wants to tighten them up, then it can do so.
To that, so when was that condition that you're referring to there? How long ago was that condition put on one of these development proposals?
Off the top of my head, Mr Mayor, from recollection, I think it's in the last couple of years. I can find the specific example in due course if Council's interested.
I am actually. I'm interested in the condition, but I'm also interested in how we make sure that that condition is met. Because it's one thing to put a condition on it, but if nothing's done after the clay pits, closed up and they stop operating out of there and it's left, even with the condition, what happens then? How is it enforced and how are we going to enforce it?
Very, very succinctly, Mr Mayor, it's not a complicated exercise. If you have an owner of a clay pit, okay, Company X gain an approval on the owner of the land, they action that approval. Even if they close up shop and complete and don't do any more extraction, if they're still own the land and they haven't abided by the condition, then they're liable, and we have recourse to hold them to account. through compliance action, inclusive at the end of the day of breaches of conditions of approval in a magistrate's court, and punitive action that way.
Just finally, Dan, so could I have a copy of those conditions that, in terms of the wording and the way that they're, that might be written into this particular development application in lieu of it?
Through Mr Mayor, what I'll do for the sake of comprehensiveness, I will obtain all the council items of extractive industries that have come before the council in the last 2 years, so you can look and see and compare. Yes.
Any other questions, councillors? Then we'll move on to the next item. It's item 4.6, filling of land and associated retaining walls existing on lot 259 Jinder Road, Coongamaya. It's on page 609 of your agenda, and the first person presenting is Matthew Bingham on behalf of Simone Solomon against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Bingham. You'll have 5 minutes to make your deputation, and I'll try and tell you when you have 1 minute left if you need that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Good evening. Simone has asked if I could circulate some pictures. Is that acceptable?
Yes, I'll get a staff member to distribute them, but whilst he takes them off you, if you can continue talking.
I just ripped the poster. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. I am Matthew Bingham, a licensed surveyor, and I will be representing on behalf of Simone Solomon, who is unwell. Simone sends her apologies. This is Simone's deputation. I am Simone Solomon, property owner of 49 Jinder Road. My property is located immediately west of 51 Jinder Road, which is subject to this illegal retaining wall construction and retrospective planning application. As a qualified town planner with over a decade of experience, I state that the retaining wall not only severely impacts the amenity of my property, but also sets a precedent for future character of this established area. I have read the administration's report and planning assessment and note a number of errors, particularly in respect to how the constructed retaining wall has been assessed against the relevant design principles of the residential design codes. I will briefly illustrate how this application does not only comply with these principles and should not be supported. If council have any doubt whether this development satisfies the relevant design principles for site works, as I will outline, then it should not approve the application. Design Principle 7.1 relates to development that considers and responds to the natural features of the site and requires minimal excavation or fill. The development does not consider nor responds to the natural features of the site. The height and the extent of the retaining construction built near the common boundaries with 49 Jinder Road and 16 Baloo Place exceed the height of the dividing fences in places. Extensive fill works have resulted in 51 Jinder Road being elevated abnormally higher than adjoining properties at 49 Jinder Road and 16 Baloo Place. In addition, the impact of a 1.8 metre high Colorbond fence only assists to further magnify the extent of the fill. These properties formerly shared the same natural ground level along their common boundaries with 51 Jinder Road. The constructed fill and retaining is also out of context with the prevailing development within this established neighbourhood. A more sensitive approach in line with the design principles, for instance, would have been to base finished ground levels on a midpoint within the subject property, based on pre-existing natural ground levels and not the finished floor level of the dwelling, which significantly exceeds the levels of my property and exacerbates the bulk and scale of the retaining wall. As such, the constructed retaining sets an undesirable precedent for future development in the area, and it cannot be said that in its current state, it cannot be said that in its current design satisfies this design principle. The second design principle, 7.2, relates to all finished levels respecting the natural ground level at the lot boundary of the site as viewed from the street. The constructed retaining wall does not meet this design principle. Finish levels have not respected the natural ground level at the lot properties with 49 Jinder Road and 16 Ballou Place. Combined fencing and retaining walls tower over 49 Jinder Road and 16 Ballou Place and can be seen from both streets. Further, the overall combined fence and retaining height is approximately 3.4 metres, 1 metre higher than what is permitted under the City of Swan Town Planning Scheme number 17. The final design principle, 7.3, requires that retaining walls result in land being effectively used for the benefit of residents.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
Whilst not detrimentally affecting adjoining properties and are designed, engineered and landscaped having due regard to site works and visual privacy criteria. Whilst it could be said that the retaining and fill benefits the use of my neighbour's property, it does so with no regard given to the amenity and enjoyment of my property. The setback of this wall is significantly less than required, being effectively nil as opposed to the 1.5 metres required. Under the R codes, a compliant retaining wall should be stepped back from the boundary line to reduce visual impact and would also ideally be softened with landscaping. The retaining and fence are not aesthetically pleasing from my side of the fence. My views to the National Park are now gone, and the outdoor main living area is instead overpowered by a massive dark steel fence, blocking breezes and obscuring natural light to my garden. I also note that there was no consultation at all before the commencement of site works, no genuine attempt at mediation from the property owner or the city's planning staff, despite this application being submitted to council well over 2 years ago. I would be willing to come to the table to discuss alternative ideas for a redesign of the retaining wall and fence to alter heights and introduce further screening, landscaping to reduce the bulk and scale of the wall, to bring the constructed retaining wall closer to satisfying the requirements of the residential design codes. In short, I reiterate that the development as it stands is unacceptable, and should council have any doubts as to whether this application satisfies all of the above mentioned design principles, it should not support the application in its current form.
Have you got much to go? Thanks, Mr Bingham.
No, I'm just about done. At the very least, council should consider deferring the application to allow for negotiations between parties to ensure that a proper process is followed in accordance with both local and state government planning requirements, or otherwise refuse the application. Thank you for the opportunity to make this deputation.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bowman first.
Thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time out today. Would there be anything possible without actually moving the retaining wall, such as landscaping, etc., that would reduce the impact?
Yeah, I'd have to take that on note and ask Simone. That's not for me.
Councillor Jones, you are next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just from something that was in the deputation, I was out at the properties today too. Which national park views is she referring to?
The ones, I don't know the name of the national park, the one up the hill to the east. Is it John Forrest National Park? Oh, sorry, I'm not sure the name of that national park.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. It might not be possible to answer this question, but this appears to be really about a swimming pool. And would it be possible for the owner of the retaining walls to have their swimming pool and move the retaining walls back? Do you think that would be feasible?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There would have to be an investigation, I guess, by an engineer.
I think that's really the issue, Mr Mayor. I've got a question for the staff.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance and your deputation on behalf of Mrs Solomon. The next speaker is Mr Terry Cosley, who's the applicant. Thank you, Mr Cosley.
Good evening.
You'll also have 5 minutes, and I'll try and tell you when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Councillor. Good evening, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who came to my property this morning to have a look at the issues we're now going to discuss. I've got a bit of a prepared speech, but basically I want to apologise, first of all, for the fact that I didn't apply for planning permission before the war started. That was taken out of my control a little bit. It was in the middle of the pandemic 2 years ago, and the construction industry was begging for work, and the builders actually jumped the gun and they went ahead. I myself was working long hours and long days, and I didn't supervise it as well as I should have. So for that, I apologise. But I did put in an application for planning permission before the Shire contacted me. So there is an email trail with Mr. Ron Gillis, Stuart Atkinson, and Liam Pocock, I believe, that demonstrates I did at least attempt, in retrospect, to try and get planning permission. So I certainly wasn't taking the city for granted or being disrespectful, but I can understand how it might look like that. There's a couple of things I wanted to address that Matthew was kind enough to speak on behalf of Simone. I've already asked Simone 3 times now for mediation and pointed out that if we don't resolve this ourselves, it'll be resolved, and maybe neither of us will be happy with the end result. So on each occasion she's turned me down flat. She hasn't discussed it at all, and I've asked her to come round for coffee on a weekend or come down or whatever she wanted really, but she's turned me down every time. The wall is part of the development of the block, and it follows the natural course of the land. We took a level off the back of my property, which just happens to be level with the road on Jinder Road. So it's quite clear from old photographs. It's actually built on top of the hill. You can see the fall on the hill, and it falls from the road down to 1.5 metres in the bottom left-hand corner, which is where most of the contention arises, I believe. So we didn't arbitrarily pick a level. We picked a level at the back of the ground level with the back of the house, and we levelled it from that point of view. I had a structural engineer with Structure and a subsequent engineer's report, and I followed their instruction to the letter to reinforce the wall and to do what I could. Now the archives are not, they're there for the guidance really, and as I put in my written submission, if in other aspects the proposal meets satisfactory planning requirements, the city is not to be just a rubber stamp to say yes or no based on the archives. They're to make up their own mind based on the proposal as a whole. Simone has, through Matthew, has said that it's not consistent with the development around Coongamire. Well, I would argue, in fact, it is. Coongamire is showing a lot of development at the moment. There's a lot of redevelopment going on. The house next door to mine, 49, was subdivided in 2016, and to do that, there was a retaining wall that was 1.8 metres above my block, the ground level of my block, whereas my retaining wall on the other side, on Simone's side, is 1.5 metres. Now, I spoke to Rohan Sims today about that wall, and there's no record of an R code being discussed at that time, because I understand from what he told me, and I can't speak for Rohan, he can speak for himself, but my understanding of what he told me was that it went through subdivision and not through boundary planning, and hence the city didn't weren't involved in the planning of the wall. But he was unable to find for me any drawings of the level of that wall. But there are photographs of a cubby house which I can stand up in, or could stand up in. It's gone now, and I'm nearly 1.8, 1.75 metres. So the wall, you can see the wall is above that level. So it's clearly 1.8 metres on the other side. So it is consistent with what's been done in the area. It's one of those things, if you're going to develop a hillside block, you're going to end up terracing. If you're going to put a pool in, as we all know, a wall is a perfect level, and the block has to be level, has to be retained, has to be safe, has to be pool fences and so on.
You have 1 minute left, thank you.
1 minute, thank you. And I would just say, I had a few other comments to say, but really just to address what Simone has said via Matthew's excellent presentation, is that I believe it is consistent. It's part of the enhancement of Coongamire by people trying to make their environment better, by making it more livable. I don't think anybody would argue it's not an improvement. I'm more than happy to speak to Simone. I think she could do more to mitigate what she believes it is the far corner from her house. It's the furthest from the house you could possibly get that she's concerned about. The new fence, the new wall, provides privacy to the back neighbour. I no longer can look right into her kitchen, which I could before. So at night time, before the fence was there, I could do that. And on Simone's side, on the left-hand side, or the western side, I could look into her entertaining area under the patio. That's all gone now. It's private on my side, it's private on her side. I think if she stepped back a little bit and looked at it a bit more dispassionately, she would see the improvement, and she could see ways that she could address some issues about the light and the wind. And I note that, well, that's probably all I need to say really about that. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate the time you give me.
Thank you. And Councillor Bowman, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
Prior to the pool being installed, did you previously apply for either a change of fill and or a retaining wall? When was this and what was the outcome?
The application for the retaining wall.
Yes.
It was applied for the application for the retaining wall initially on the first email to the city was on the 12th of August 2020. They sent it back to me because I admitted to sign one of the sections, and I resubmitted that, and I paid the fees, and that was in September. So that was prior to Mr. Giddos coming out to view the wall and tell me that, that it had already been built and it hadn't been approved.
Okay.
Otherwise, I applied first.
And the wall that's been built, did that come with structural engineer certification?
Two engineers have looked at it. Structure designed it, and a second engineer reviewed the films and suggested more. Reviewed the pictures and suggested more support for the fence post. I've provided a long report to the city, including photographs, which I believe is on the file, which will be on the file.
Okay.
So it's got two structural engineers. I've also employed a licensed surveyor to measure the wall and to tell me where all the levels are. That's why I can say to you that the level at the back of the house is pretty much the same as the level of the road, and the fall is from the back of the house, which is obviously was retained 40 years, 50 years ago, down to the bottom left-hand corner, which is the area of contention. It's about 3 or 4 metres, I would guess, plus the fence that's of concern to Simone, I would imagine, because that's the highest point. Because up at the house, it's only 300 millimetres off the ground.
Okay, and Mr Mayor, my final question. You said you're willing to mediate with the owners.
Twice, by memory.
So what are you proposing? What are you suggesting that you'd be willing to do to make it a better outcome for the neighbours instead of seeing a 3.4 metre high wall?
Well, it's a 1.5 metre wall with a 1.8 metre colour-bond fence on it, which has to be. You need a fence anyway. The existing fence is asbestos. It's at 1,200 millimetres and it's falling down. So the wall was built on my side, on my land, not on the boundary. It was built inside the boundary. That's the first point I make. Secondly, in mediation, you listen before you propose. So if I went to mediation, I would listen to what Simone wanted. I would be looking at some kind of soft landscaping. I would assume some kind of planting, some foliage, something to enhance that area. Planter boxes, a raised beds, something along those lines. Clearly, and I was more than happy to discuss that with Simone. Just that she was unwilling to meet me.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So just taking the same line that what would happen in the mediation. So there was a mediation between yourself and Simone. Would you be prepared, for instance, as just a hypothetical here, to move the retaining wall on the western boundary back 2 metres or 1.8 metres so that it complied with the R codes? I mean, that would probably satisfy Simone, and you could still have your swimming pool.
Well, no, I couldn't actually, because
well, you'd have to move the spa.
It would take out the spa for start. Secondly, it would then be too close to swimming pool. And you're talking about a retaining wall that weighs, I don't know, 50 tonnes. You're not talking about a temporary fence. It's engineered to stay there forever. With what you see on the wall on one side, as you know, is very different to what's on the other side. There's a whole raft of support on the other side. It would be at least 50 tonnes to move it.
That's true.
And moving it on my property, I don't understand why that would be a viable option.
Well, is that not a reasonable thing that Simone and yourself could accept? Obviously, you could move your spa to the other side of the pool. It looks like there's room for it. So would you be prepared to consider that?
I don't think I'd be prepared to consider moving the wall. No, I think that's no. I think I'm happy to talk about anything, but just to concede moving the wall off the cuff, I think that's a major step, which would be majorly expensive.
Yeah. Do you think you should have thought about that before putting the retaining wall in?
Well, as I said earlier, I was working 12 hours a day. I said to the guys building it, who were desperate for work at the time, if you can recall, 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, and I said, don't start this until I have a planning permission. We need planning permission to start it. I said categorically. And yet I woke up on Wednesday morning with 200 limestone blocks outside my window.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
I'm the owner. I take responsibility, but they were desperate for work. We had the state politicians saying, if you have things that can be got ready.
I think you've answered the question. Thanks, Mr. Cosley. Councillor Richardson, you're next.
So definitely alternate motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Terry, very much for your deputation. I just wanted to clarify, we've talked about the fact that you had 2 structural engineers, doing this particular drawing. This is not a cheap fence that you've put up. I do find it very, very difficult that, when you actually employ 2 structural engineers, that they would not have, guided you in the process. I'm just wondering, what was the date the fence was actually put up?
I can't tell you offhand.
Approximately.
It was before it would have been July, I think, July 2020.
2020. And you said you were working long hours.
Yes.
Were you away from the property?
For 12 hours, yes. I left the property before 9 o'clock and got back after 9.
But you lived nearby?
No,
yeah.
It's my property, I live there.
So you got these expensive structure drawings done?
Yes.
And did you give a copy to the fence company?
Yes. Oh, you mean to the builders?
To the people who put the limestone blocks in, and is there 2 companies involved in this, or one?
Well, initially, because the second engineering report was requested by the city. And that
hang on. Was there 2 fencing companies involved? One that put in the limestone blocks, like a brickie, and then there was a roofing, a fencing.
Correct.
There was 2.
In fact, there was 3. There was Structure who did the drawings for the engineering.
No. But on the day that they came along, you said you came home and found all these sandstone blocks delivered, and then the next day they put the bricks in.
Yes.
And then how long after the bricks were in did the fence go up?
I believe it was the next day. I believe it all happened in 3 or 4 days. It was done.
But the fencing company and the brick
the
company
company was separate. I'm trying to think.
So both those, fencing.
No, I'm sorry. The builders put the fence up. The fencing company put the gates in. Sorry.
But neither of them received a copy of the drawings, though.
No. The building company, Phoenix Building, received a copy of the drawings from Structure, from the engineers.
Right. Okay. Did it strike you when you saw it built that it was very unusually high, and it?
Well, it did, but it wasn't levelled at that stage. And when it was levelled from my block, it's a 1.8 metre colour-bond fence.
Because it is quite high and it's straight to the eye, so it would have been predominantly.
But
there.
it's no different if it is shorter than the fence on the other side.
Okay. I just wanted to know if you'd actually provided the fencing company with some drawings.
I did. I've got an email. I think it was the 20th of August. I sent a copy of these.
Did anyone in that process from those 2 structural engineers or the fencing company and the brick company query the setbacks or the height of the fence with you?
No one queried it at all with me, no.
Were they local?
One was Phoenix Building, which I think is the northern suburbs. Structure, I believe, is used by a lot of engineering people in Midland.
Okay. And is there no compromise whatsoever that you'd be looking at to reduce the height of that fence?
I didn't say that.
No, I'm asking you. Would there be a compromise with your neighbour?
Move the retaining wall.
No, to drop the height of that fence.
The height of the fence is part of the.
No, I'm asking you. Would there be a compromise? Just a yes or a no? Would you be prepared to drop?
I don't think you can phrase a compromise like is a yes or no. There are issues to talk about with that. I think it would take away, diminish her privacy as well as mine. It would. There would be issues with the pool fencing as well, which would need to be considered. It would be out of proportion to the rest of the fence.
Okay.
Are you talking about the whole fence?
I'm talking about the height of the Stratco fence is predominantly not within keeping of the character of the area. Would you be prepared to drop that height?
It's identical to the fence on the other side. In fact, it's smaller than the fence on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Knight. Staff? Thank you for your attendance and your deputation and answering questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, you're first.
Thank you. I'm not sure I was actually, Mr. Mayor, but I'll go. A question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Russell. Is it a feasible thing? Could council approve this, subject to the 50-ton retaining wall being rebuilt 1.8 metres to the east?
Councillor Knight.
We'd have to reject it then.
Councillor Knight.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, if we approve it, who's liable if the wall that's up forever falls down? Are we, as a city, liable?
Mr. Russell. Any, Councillor Bowman.
Mr. Mayor, just to the Manager of Planning through you, just confirming there was an application that was submitted and it was rejected and the dates of those.
I can affirm before next week what you will find is that the applicant, the gentleman would have sought to have lodged material. The application would not have been formally received and accepted if it is incomplete. Either the forms setting out the legal land ownership or signatures to that were incomplete, or there was a lack of information. What is certainly the case is that the report on past planning approvals, if an application has been formally received, for it to be refused, it had to have come here to council, or at the very least it would have been refused if further information was required and it wasn't submitted. That would have come up. So, for all intents and purposes, no application by the owner was ever formally received.
Councillor Henderson.
A question for Mr. Russell, please, Mayor.
Yes.
We have a policy on the placement of water tanks, for instance, and distances from boundaries in case they fail and flood and cause damage. It would seem as though there's a bit of a conflict between that policy and very large amounts of water in swimming pools should one of those fail through an earthquake or a landslide or whatever. Is there some way of approaching the risk from a swimming pool in a similar way that we do tanks?
I've been asked if you could turn your microphone on. Thanks, Mr. Russell.
And I thought my voice might have been loud enough, Mr. Mayor. I'll stand up just to cast it further for you. The policy that Councillor Henderson is referring to with respect to setback from distances isn't about a concern with a water tank, an elevated water tank rupturing so much. It's about the amenity issues of a structure as viewed from a boundary. So, which is the similar situation with respect to the performance criteria here in relation to retaining. The R Code's performance criteria doesn't mention anything in relation to concerns with structural integrity, because that is not a planning matter, that is an engineering matter, a building matter. What it talks about is, we use the term respecting the natural level of the land. So as the report articulates, it's going to the heart of what we're talking about from a planning point of view, is the visual impact of a level difference, not a structural thing. So whilst certainly there are naturally quite important structural issues that arise with these things, they don't arise within the planning context, they arise within a building context and an engineering context. And we're only dealing with the planning context here, which is manifest in, can you see these walls? What is the impact visually of these walls and the fencing on top of it, as viewed from the street and as viewed from surrounding properties?
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Just in relation to that last question, I remember some 30 years ago when I put a swimming pool in, the depth of the pool at 2 metres had to be a minimum of 2 metres from the adjoining fence. It may have changed in the last 30 years, but there was a time when the distance from an adjoining fence was based on the depth of the pool, but what the current legislation is, I don't know. Councillors, that brings us to the end of Part B. We now move to Part C, where it's a confidential item, and I have 4 people present to make deputations. Shortly, I'll call for a motion to move behind closed doors for that confidential item, and I believe the fairest way to do it is item C 3.7, sale of proposed lot 811 Junction Parade in Midland. I believe the fairest way is to have one person in the chamber at a time giving their deputation. They'll then have questions asked of them, and then I'll call in the next person in order. So that's what I intend to do. So the first speaker will be Mr. Patrick Irwin on the item. I'll call him to the podium shortly. But before I do that, I need a motion to move behind closed doors. Thank you. Moved Councillor Zanino, seconded Councillor Parry. Is there anyone against? Well, I've got 4 people registered to make deputations, 3 being, I assume, against the item, and then the proponent for the item.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding would be none of them would be fully aware of what's in that report, and therefore can speak on whatever they like to speak on. Obviously, the proponent may be a little bit restricted because unless they've been provided confidential information, they wouldn't. As a councillors, we probably can't ask any questions of those. And if we want to ask questions of the proponent, perhaps we need to go behind closed doors, and even the proponent's deputation would go behind closed doors. But otherwise I'll be voting against going behind closed doors to listen one by one of 3 people who have no idea what's in that report.
Okay, well, I've had a mover and a seconder, so you're obviously against going behind closed doors.
A question to you, Mr. Mayor. Are we suggesting, or is Councillor Bowman suggesting, that the 3 people speaking will be heard in one session and then the proponent in another? I'm finding it hard to follow, sorry.
Well, he was nodding his head to what you said, so I assume that he is agreeing with what you said. The only difference is I thought it would be better to hear each person individually, so they can, if you've got questions of them, you can ask the questions, they can give their questions, and then I'd call the next person in to give their deputation. They'd give their deputation independent of anybody else.
Ask those 3 any questions.
Well, you might be able to, I don't know.
Have anything to do with the report, because it's confidential.
Well, I don't know what they're going to say in their deputation, Councillor Bowman, so I can't make that call.
Question.
But I'll put it to the vote shortly. I'll
Question.
hear from you, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, my question is, what's our previous practice been? I think our previous practice has been when people making deputations want to make a deputation about a confidential item, we hear them in public. And if we then find that there are questions that are of a confidential nature, well, we can't really ask the people making the deputation.
Well, I don't
we can
know
only
what
ask
your
the staff.
questions will be until you've asked the question.
Yep,
but I don't recall a situation that we've had a proponent wanting to make a deputation on a confidential item and 3 people wishing to speak against that item. I just don't recall it happening before, and that's why I thought it would be best for each person to make their deputation independently of each other. If there's any questions to be asked, you could ask that person making the deputation, and obviously if we're behind closed doors, that's a matter of for us to determine. So any other Councillor Johnson.
Just a further question. Can we then assemble and come up with an actual motion about this? Do we need
I've
to...
got a motion I've got to deal with. It was moved and seconded, so I've got to deal with that motion first. Either we move behind closed doors or we don't.
All right.
So I'll put that to the vote.
Can we speak to it?
Well, I thought you just had.
Oh, I'm asking questions.
Okay, so Councillor Parry, Councillor Zanino, you wish to speak to the item of going behind closed doors?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My experience is that this council previously, on any confidential items that are in the red folder, would always go behind closed doors, and any deputations were made behind closed doors on an individual basis, and that's the way it should be.
Thank you. Councillor Parry is the seconder.
Mr Mayor, I wish to put the motion, if you don't mind.
Well, you're moving to put the motion. I need a 75%. We're missing one councillor, so I'll have to get someone to do the maths, but I've had a mover to put the motion that we go behind closed doors. Those in favour? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, being Councillor Jones, myself, Councillor Parry, Councillor Zanino and Councillor McCulloch. That motion is lost. So I'm looking for some direction, councillors. Councillor Johnson.
I think we're debating a motion at the moment, aren't we? So I'd like to speak.
No, the motion's been lost.
The motion to put the motion. We've failed to put the motion. Now we're speaking for and against.
Well,
speaking against.
Okay, continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, councillors, I think it's reasonable that people making a deputation on a confidential item when they don't know what is in the confidential report, that their deputation be held in public, because it's a matter of public interest. If we're going to ask questions, it's up to individual councillors to make sure that the questions they ask do not breach the rules of confidentiality. In the event that councillors do want to make a question of either the person making the deputation or staff, then we need to go behind closed doors. So I would suggest the best way to do this is to vote down this motion, because I think we need to hear the deputations in public, and then we proceed from there. So that's my take. I'll be voting against the motion to go behind closed doors, and I'll be foreshadowing another motion to allow the deputations to be done in public. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, are you talking about all 4 deputations, the 3... Okay, well, that's what I was trying to avoid. So I've got one speaker against going behind closed doors, speaker for going behind closed doors.
Through you, Mr Mayor. It's just that the audio keeps dropping in and out, so it's just a little bit hard to hear, so my apologies for my interruptions. Are we now discussing the potential of 3 people making a public statement about a confidential item that they don't know anything about, but they're entitled to make a comment, obviously, and then are we going behind closed doors so that the proponent can speak about a confidential item? But I suppose he doesn't know what's in the report either, does he? So everyone's in the same...
And that's why I asked for clarification from Councillor Johnson, and I believe his indication to me that all 4 deputations would be held in public.
However, I'm through you, Mr Mayor. I guess the difference is the proponent would be more across what they are proposing and have more information than the general public. So how is it possible for the proponent to be able to speak freely about their proposition if it's not in the public domain? I'm just a bit confused as to why we wouldn't go behind closed doors for the proponent.
Well, because that's what I tried to clarify with...
That the general public can speak in the public domain.
And that's what I tried to clarify with Councillor Johnson, and I believe he indicated to me that all 4 deputations would be held in public.
That's right, but another councillor can foreshadow another motion to hear the first 3 in public and then hear the proponent behind closed doors.
They can. So I've had a speaker against going behind closed doors with a foreshadowed motion. I'll call for a speaker to go behind closed doors. No speakers on that item. Councillor Bowman.
What are we voting on?
We're not voting on nothing at the moment, Councillor Prodovnik. I'm calling for debate on the motion to go behind closed doors at the moment. Councillor Johnson has spoken against.
Mr.
No, not at this point. Just a motion to go behind closed doors to deal with the items. Councillor Bowman.
Mr. Mayor, I originally indicated that as like Councillor Johnson, the three wishing to speak would not know what's in that report, and therefore what they are to speak about, everyone should be able to hear. I did also mention that the applicant will have information that is confidential. However, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to throw a spanner in the works, and this is a agenda forum and it's a non-decision making, yet you're asking for us to vote and do procedural motions as well. So that, I believe, under our standing orders, is a agenda forum is non-decision making. So therefore, I will not be voting on a vote that I believe cannot actually be asked of. So again, perhaps the CEO may need to give some direction on what needs to happen there, and I would expect it will end up being a mayoral decision of what is about to happen.
Thank you. I'll just take some advice and take a moment for the CEO. Otherwise, we'll proceed. And as I said, I thought it was the right decision to move to go behind closed doors, to hear people who wish to present individually, have questions asked of those individuals individually, so they're not aware of what each other has spoken about because it is a confidential item, and then to have the proponents present independently of other people being in the gallery because they might want to discuss items that relate to a confidential report. So, Mr. Freund, if I could have some assistance, please.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, councillors. In the absence of any rules contained in the local law relating to meeting procedure, it generally relates to or falls upon the Mayor to make those decisions. It is quite correct that voting should not occur in relation to these matters because there's no specific clause in the standing orders that relates to meeting procedures in agenda briefings. However, I take the point that the Mayor is seeking some guidance after his ruling was challenged that he would be going behind closed doors to allow the speakers to speak in a particular way. So I'm interpreting the Mayor's actions as seeking guidance from the Council rather than making a formal decision.
Yes, and look, I'll apologise. I'm a little bit sluggish, but I won't say anything further than that. If it's my decision, then I will have the deputations speak one at a time, independently of each other, so they get to address council privately, and we'll then ask questions of each individually, and then we'll have the proponents come forward. That's my ruling. Thank you. So I'll need item 2.2.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a couple of things I'd like to get some answers on. The Marshall Road duplication on page 104. What's the driver for that? Because it's going to be a long time before we see urban there, and I'm wondering why it's a priority. Built environment.
Mr. Coaten, please.
Yeah, that is traffic volumes. I can circulate some information to you on that.
Yeah, I'd love to see it because I drive up and down there all the time and it's not very busy. So if I can move on to the actual advocacy list. under social on page 112, for a long time there's been issues about mobile phone and NBN issues in Gidgegannup that we've been working with federal government on. However, clearly we've had the similar NBN problems in the Swan Valley for a long time, and it's actually come to the fore again. So can we add, if you like, in terms of the rural area, to that, the Swan Valley zone? Is there any issue with doing that, Mr Mayor?
I've got no objection.
Perhaps I can help with that. I know the local members are very well aware of the lack of coverage in the Swan Valley area, so I don't think it would be any problem at all to add Swan Valley to this list. In fact, I think it would be very wise to.
Thank you.
Well, just before you go on, Councillor Henderson, you were at the same AGM last week I was for the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance. That was a hot topic, and they've been given an indication by NBN that for $5 million they'd have a complete restructure, a business grade NBN. So they're looking for some support from their federal and state members for that, because when the NBN rolled out the coverage to the Swan Valley area, they only looked at the residential. They didn't realise there's hundreds of thousands of visitors there a year. Most of them want to get straight on their device and communicate what a great time they've had, take selfies and put them on all their TwitFace accounts and what have you. So the NBN have realised that was an error. NBN have realised that error and have promised to make up as long as they can get some funding from the federals.
So just to finish on that particular one, so in terms of state, perhaps it should be Swan Hills and West Swan in terms of advocacy. So two seats there. On the same page, if you go up to the top under Bullsbrook Freight and Industrial Area, that's not West Swan, that's Swan Hills. That needs to be corrected. The seat boundaries have changed. Now on page 114, Nangara Road Dual Carriageway, I see there's some federal funding commitment. Is there any commitment to date from the state?
Are you aware of any, Mr Coaten?
In relation to the dualling of the roundabouts, there is some MRRG funding, but there isn't for the dualling of the actual lane.
Okay, and that gets close to the boundary. Well, actually, it is West Swan, my mistake. On the Altern Skate Park, on page 117, better off that I ask the questions now rather than next week, Mr Mayor.
That's what we're here for.
$600,000 for a skate park when there's already one there, albeit old. What's the driver for a $600,000 spend for a skate park? What's driving this as an advocacy?
Mr Coaten?
Well, I think if your question is in relation to the costs,
yeah.
I mean, as an example, the Midvale skate park down Morrison Road, that was over $1 million. So, it is the sort of thing you can have small value parks or larger value. Obviously, the larger it is, the more embellished it is, and arguably the better it is.
Okay, thank you. So really what I want to get down to then is the criteria of this $600,000 spend against other priorities. How have we prioritised this one above lots and lots and lots of others?
Because of the age of the infrastructure, the components on the park are no longer fit for use. This has been put off for a number of years. And remember, this isn't $600,000 that the city's putting up. This is grant funding that we're applying for through state and federal opportunities. So to build a better, safer park. I thought that we could reuse the equipment there and put it at another place in need of State Park, and I was told no, the equipment is actually dangerous and could not be repurposed for anything. So it's about creating all those jumps and rides that the kids have to satisfy the safety standards of today, and none of the existing park equipment could be repurposed.
So you're saying that City of Swan won't have to put up any money?
Well, we're seeking $600,000 in grant funding.
Well, that's a good start, thanks. The next one is on the same page, 117. State advocacy funding for Ellenbrook Youth Centre. Could I suggest from a state perspective that because Ellenbrook is split in half over West Swan and Swan Hills, that it be both seats that it's advocated on?
Noted.
On page 119, under the Baskerville Pavilion upgrades, which are long overdue, we also are aware that the North Pavilion at Lilac Hill is in desperate need of upgrade. How did it fare in terms of its importance or need over others?
Mr. Coaten?
I don't believe that one was specifically identified for consideration as part of the advocacy. The reason the Baskerville one is on there is that it is more advanced. We're actually currently doing some of the planning and design for it, and one of the things, I think one of my rules is be careful what you ask for because you might get it. And if we ask for money for the Lilac Hill North Pavilion and then we don't have any designs, we haven't done any planning, it puts us on the back foot.
Okay, so I gather then we're undertaking those plans and the like?
We generally don't seek funding opportunities until we've got...
but are we working on the Lilac Hill?
The Lilac Hill is a longer term one. We have done some concept designs, but there's nothing on the, and I don't remember what year it is in the budget, but it would be further out. It's
okay.
not. It's
so
not
anyhow, it's on our books. Yeah, thank you. And I'll go back to page 111. Can I just get some clarification on improvements in planning regulations, livable neighbourhoods and R codes such as more trees are retained in the urban landscape? Now that's very broad. Does that include private land?
Mr. van der Linde?
Mr. Mayor, as part of the advocacy program, I suppose this relates to the city's input in the reform work that's being done by government. And in that regard, it will be input in the review of livable neighbourhoods, for instance. And wherever they address the retention of trees on private land, it will include that. What we're doing internally from that perspective is we're preparing a scheme amendment and a local planning policy to facilitate that. That came out of the tree canopy plan that we've prepared previously. So that work's happening internally. But I suppose from an advocacy perspective, this is where we have to work with the government to make changes. So for instance, in livable neighbourhoods, the new medium density R codes that come out will address tree retention and the provision of trees within new developments to a greater extent, and the city will participate in those discussions with government.
So just to be clear, Mr. Mayor, are we talking about development? In other words, what developers have got to provide? I want to be clear that we're going to advocate for, obviously, tree retention on Crown land or council land, but I want to be absolutely clear that we're not talking about advocating against the rights of landowners, private landowners.
Mr. van der Linde?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of the advocacy here, this refers to planning regulations that the department is dealing with. Now, they are currently dealing with changes to the R codes and livable neighbourhoods that basically address new development. And in terms of Council's previous resolution on the urban forest plan, out of that there was an action that we will progress a scheme amendment that provides for the potential of a local planning policy where we address the retention of trees on private land. That was an action out of that plan, and that work's being progressed internally. So it's a bit two different things, but so we're certainly doing some work internally, but this is referring to the work that the department is doing, which relates to new development more so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have further discussions with Mr. Van Lien on that before the meeting next week, and if necessary, make an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parry, you're next.
I've just got a quick question, if you don't mind. I'll refer to page 118 in regards to the Altone change room update to include unisex facilities. The first comment says, the state has experienced a large growth in female participation in sport in the past decade, which may, with many additional sport offerings available for facilities. As a result, Altone Park Pavilion, ... Why aren't we considering that from a City of Swan perspective, and only just an Altone perspective?
Mr. Coaten?
There are other ones being considered in the City of Swan. The Altone one was one of the ones that was considered one of the high priorities.
So you've got a list of every single project or every single unisex required facility in the future, do you?
There is a list of the higher priority ones, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think towards the bottom of the paragraph it says that they've recently had the Morley Female Cricket Club and East Perth Women's Football Club now operating out of Altone. So
I understand that, Mr. Mayor, but also the fact that Ellenbrook and the Urban Growth Corridor has had exponential growth as well, which would be more than 50.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's a recurring subject, this. It seems that, it reminds me of a song, my South Guildford underpass, requested through a petition from the South Guildford community, has disappeared off the list again. Just wonder if there's any explanation as to why. Because there have been so many motions to put that underpass on the advocacy priority list. I don't understand why it would not be on it, particularly as it's colour-coded, showing that the existing priorities from the 2021 advocacy priority book. I mean, just because it wasn't in the priority book doesn't mean it's not on the advocacy list. So has there been some mistake to miss it off? Yeah, I guess whoever's going to
Thank you, Ms. Pickering.
Thank you. So, through you, Mr. Mayor, that particular item was on the original plans for the advocacy priorities. We circulated a survey to councillors to narrow down the list to go in the final plan, and unfortunately that particular item didn't make the cut-off.
But there have been numerous council resolutions to put that on, so we can't just take it off. It's on there. So it's, in my view, I shouldn't need to make an amendment to put it in. It should just be in there by default. So it is an advocacy priority list item. It did not make it into the booklet, but the booklet was in error because the booklet should have included it. And I don't think just a straw poll of councillors is any reason to remove it, particularly as it has been advocated for by significant numbers of people in the community. So I'd like it to go back in rather than me having to move an alternate motion to put it back, because I've done that on numerous occasions.
Yeah, look, I stand to be corrected. I think it was mentioned in the advocacy booklet, and I think I had I'm saying the last advocacy booklet, but the feedback from the state government was they're not contemplating on doing anything on that underpass until such time as Made Roads and I believe Water Corp undertake major constructions, and that's about a decade away.
So that's a reason to be advocating for it.
Well, it will happen in that time frame, but
So anyway, we've passed resolutions, it should not be removed from here by anybody without a council resolution. So I think it just...
well, I'm not sure it was subject to a council resolution or not, Councillor Johnson. I don't recall. If it is a council resolution, if you can find it or staff can find it, then it'll be on the advocacy list if it's a resolution of this council.
I would have thought this would change all of our advocacy priorities. I mean, I had the same argument about the Swan Valley Visitor Centre. It's not there either.
Sorry.
We discussed this in that briefing. In the briefing we discussed, we had an advocacy priority list. That was the list. If councils want to add things to it, that's fine. But to remove things from it requires a resolution of council. We've not resolved to remove it. So this list, I just would like it put back in. I've moved at least 3 motions to put it back, and I do not want to have to move another
I'll
one.
just
So
ask the staff to...
ask the CEO to please put it back in.
Find those resolutions. If there's a resolution of council, it will go back in. Councillor Catalano, you are next.
Yes, thank you. Getting back to the NBN, when you were talking about making changes to include the Swan Valley, is that something that you're going to do by an alternative motion, or are you just asking staff to do that? No, but I wanted it clarified now because I didn't understand how that was going to be done. Is that going to be done through an alternative motion, or is that done by just asking you here and now? Because not only is the Swan Valley affected, but Caversham and Dayton are also, New Caversham and Dayton are also affected by lack of coverage, and I'd like them put on as well. Those 2 areas put on as well. So what does that mean? Does an alternative motion have to be put up? Who can answer that?
Well, we can go out with an advocacy list with 1,000 items on it. And I think you heard the presentation by someone the other night who said you need 3 top priorities and then a few other priorities under that. So this is currently the one you're talking about, Councillor Catalano, is talk about increased phone and NBN coverage in Gidgee-Gunnup, Wooroloo.
Yeah.
Councillor Henderson specifically dealt with the Swan Valley.
Yep.
Because I was privy to a presentation in which their own tourism alliance have taken the bull by the horns and are negotiating directly with the NBN.
Yeah.
And the NBN said, look, we made a mistake. We only looked at the residential population of the Swan Valley. We didn't realise hundreds of thousands of visitors went into that location every year. We've made a mistake. We'll update it. So
I know, but the same thing happened recently at a meeting in Caversham, where people in Caversham were put on the top of their list, and I think you'll find it on Facebook if you do actually look in the Caversham residents and ratepayers. The number one, or one of the top issues, was lack of coverage in Caversham, and I know Dayton is similarly affected. So,
and I believe Allenbrook and Aveley is also
but my
affected.
question is really, were you planning on doing an amendment to bring that Swan Valley into the advocacy list, or is that going to be done just automatically behind the scenes? That's the question I'm asking here tonight. Oh, well, perhaps staff could answer it, please.
Well, I don't think it needs amendment because the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance are doing their own negotiation with the NBN.
Okay, if that doesn't need an amendment, then can I ask that Caversham and Dayton be put on that in that same sentence of places without coverage? You've got Gidgee-Gunnup, Swan Valley.
You want to move an
and our
alternative
Caversham
motion,
and Dayton.
Councillor Catalano? That's up to you.
Oh, so I have to do an alternative motion for Caversham and Dayton, but not for the Swan Valley. Is that what
I just said? I don't believe any alternative motions relied upon. I was just giving you some feedback that the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance are negotiating with the NBN direct.
I see. So that wasn't going to go on the advocacy list, the Swan Valley? This is what I'm trying to understand. That's why I'm asking questions. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Councillor Henderson raised it, so I'll ask him because
No,
I can't answer
actually, I was
for
going
him.
to ask staff. It's a question for staff. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so that means I also have to move a notice
Well, I
of
said
motion as well.
You can move any alternative.
No, I
motion.
know I obviously can, but I'm just saying on this particular issue, I have to move an alternative motion. Correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson first.
After that discussion, I'm just trying to clarify. So, as the South Guildford pedestrian overpass appears to have been omitted accidentally somehow from this, as it is an error or omission, are the staff going to insert it and reissue this part of the agenda with that?
As I said earlier, if it's a resolution of this council, then it should go back in.
All right. It is.
Ms.
Okay, thank
Pickering,
you.
have you got a comment to make on that? Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of things. Firstly, regarding the NBN, if it makes it easier for council, because I am aware of lots of gaps in the NBN across the region, perhaps we just somebody could move an alternate motion to just address the issues regarding NBN throughout the Swan LGA, and that would cover off everybody without having to name individual suburbs. Regarding the South Guildford Bridge underpass, that item wasn't accidentally left off. I guess the idea of this particular document is to focus our efforts on a number of advocacy priorities for the next 12 months. For that reason, why that particular project is not on the advocacy priority list, because it's just a too far out project that advocating on it at the moment at the expense of something else, I just didn't believe was a good use of staff resources.
Mr. Mayor, through you to the CEO, surely that is wrong. If we've got a council resolution stating that something is on the advocacy priority list, it is not appropriate for staff to have an opinion to remove it.
And that's what I said, Councillor Johnson.
Okay, thank you.
I've asked council staff to find that motion, and if it's there, then it should go back on until council makes an alternative recommendation. Okay. Any other items on 2.2? Otherwise, I'll ask, is there any other questions on any of the remaining items, councillors? Councillor Jones first. Okay, I was asking if there's any questions specifically on any item before. Well, has anyone got any questions? Well, what's your question? Thank you, Councillor.
The question is about the draft policy, debt collection rates and service charges. If that actually just goes into the lump, approval, I forgot what you call that now, but that one is a definite financial conflict for me. So what do you want to do about that?
Well, have you filled out a conflict?
I have. I gave it to you tonight.
Okay, I didn't read it.
So what happens with that one? Is that going to be done separately? I just want to highlight that.
Well, Councillor Podovnik, if you're talking about item 1311...
Catalano.
1311?
1311, yes.
Councillor Podovnik has already indicated, I believe may have already submitted an alternative recommendation.
Okay.
What that is, I don't know.
All right, that's fine.
Yet,
then
it'll
be withdrawn then.
Interest, whatever that interest may be. You may or may not have to leave the chamber because I don't know what the interest is.
It's financial. I have to leave the chamber.
Okay.
Yes.
That's fine. Any other questions? And then I'll go through the list. Didn't want to go through every item. I was just going to go around the room and ask for withdrawals. But is there any other questions before I do that? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. 13.1 has been on the agenda for a long time. Page 13. Given that on C3.2, which is confidential, there may be an opportunity to utilise that Bank West building and pour money into refurbishing it to some extent and improve its value for sale. I just wanted to know why it's taking so long for something to happen with that.
Mr. van der Linde.
Mr. Mayor, at first there was an interest by one party that was negotiated. That didn't came to fruition. Then there was a second party that was interested in it, and then it was mentioned at the Midland Oval workshops that this building could probably or possibly be used as staff accommodation in the longer term. So we haven't brought it back to council because we need some guidance out of that Midland Oval workshop to see what happens there, and that will guide us in terms of to recommend what to do with it. And apart from that, there's another party that's now looking at using it on a temporary basis for 2 years, which we're waiting for a formal proposal. So there's things happening in the background, so we just haven't had the opportunity to bring it back to council.
Thank you. Councillor Parry, a question?
Just an administrative one, Mr Mayor. I'm assuming that 13.3 has now been taken away with item 2.3, is that correct? So policy review provision of public art is taken care of with 2.3 as well? Just double checking.
No, that's not correct. The one that's in section 13 relates to the developer contribution specifically.
Okay. Might need to reword that then if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Bowman, you have a question?
Through you, Mr Mayor, to the CEO. Who can vary council policies? Is it my understanding correct that only council can vary councillor policies?
Only council can change a council policy, but if a council policy provides a clause that provides the CEO with some discretion, then obviously the CEO can use that discretion.
The other question is, are there other examples of other local governments that have that clause in their policy? Because I've tried to find today, I couldn't find any, so I can look at them.
I would say there would be, but we could have a quick look and come back to you on that.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I wasn't going to go through the entire list, but it looks like it's going to be the quickest way to do it. Councillor Jones has withdrawn item 3.1, We the People. Do you know what you want to do with that one, Councillor Jones? And 4.5, the extractive industries. Okay, Councillor Catalano, any items to withdraw?
Yes, thank you. Asset management strategy, 2.1. So then obviously 2.2, 2.7, and perhaps we C 3.1.
Is that it? Councillor Bowman?
Including the ones that are already been nominated, 2.7 and 7.2.
Thank you. Councillor Parry? I'm doing it randomly, so I can't be accused of being biased on one side, left side. So, have you got any to withdraw or not? Councillor Knight? Councillor Howlett? Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, just 4.6, Mr Mayor. Congomire swimming pool.
4.6?
4.6. That's the filling of land and associated retaining walls, Jinder Road, Congomire.
Thank you. Councillor McCulloch?
Nothing at this stage.
Councillor Henderson?
Yes, 4.5. Sorry, Councillor Jones, perhaps we should discuss that one. And That's it for the moment.
Councillor Richardson.
4.4.
Oh, sorry, and obviously 2.2, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Zanino.
Not at this stage, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Prodovnik.
We've got 1311.
Yes.
But I'll have a chat to Councillor Johnson about 4.6 as well. So maybe something different.
Okay, I believe I've asked all councillors. What I'd ask you is please remember, if you wish to move an alternative, please liaise with the appropriate staff. Get your alternative or your motion in by Monday if possible, so it gives the opportunity for all other councillors to give it due consideration. Being no further business, then I declare the meeting closed at 9:18. Thanks everyone for your attendance and perseverance.